As a responsible government, we have the duty to use all available means in order to stop the escalating violence and restore calmness in society.
Two of my friends were arrested yesterday.
我哋而家咧要警察離開，撤出校園。
The police came inside CUHK to catch CUHK students and brought them out.
最驚係香港會變到好似中國內地咁樣，係冇晒自由。
I'm not thinking that the democracy will come easily.
Hello, my name is Gary Byung-Seok Kam, and I'm a documentary producer based in South Korea and a member of Academy Documentary Department. And thank you so much for joining us for this virtual Oscar nominee tribute and the conversation with the filmmaker Anders Hammer, hosted by Vidiots Foundation. Since its opening in 1985, Vidiots Foundation has been giving LA important access to the documentary, international, and experimental films you couldn't find anywhere in LA. And this iconic LA video store is relaunching soon at the historic Eagle Theater in Los Angeles. And Anders is a Norwegian documentary maker and journalist, and he has been covering ongoing wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. This year, he's joining us with his Oscar-nominated short documentary, Do Not Split, that captured Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests in 2019. Understand, congratulations on your nomination. This is great news, and I understand that your film has been really well received since the world premiere at the Sundance Film Festival this year. But you must have a kind of mixed feelings about the nomination and the considering the current situation in Hong Kong, which big of a change so far.
The main theme of our documentary Do Not Split is how basic democratic rights are disappearing in Hong Kong, and unfortunately that process has continued also after our documentary ended. So this just over the last few months we have seen very serious and negative developments in Hong Kong, where people who took part in these protests have been arrested. There are changes in the electoral system, which makes it less democratic, to my mind and many commentators' minds. And then you have a great deal of pressure being put on the whole art scene in Hong Kong. There are big discussions now, for instance, about a new museum that will open. It's called the M+ Museum. So there's a lot of political pressure on what they will be allowed to show in this museum. So in many ways, Hong Kong has changed a lot over the last years, and also since we started filming Do Not Split in the summer of 2019. And unfortunately, it's been going in a very negative direction. So when we got nominated, I was, of course, concerned about the situation in Hong Kong, but I also hope that with this nomination, we can bring attention to the critical situation in Hong Kong. And I think that has worked okay. It's been quite a lot of debate around our documentary, and that is about the fundamental issues. That is also the main theme in the documentary, how democracy is disappearing in Hong Kong. So and that was the aim of making the documentary, to bring attention to the critical situation in Hong Kong. So it worked.
Yeah, it is a really, first of all, it's heartbreaking to witness how, as you said, how the situation in Hong Kong has been changing rapidly in a short period of time, and the basic rights and freedom of speech and freedom of expression is just disappearing. I mean, the democracy is just being destroyed. And I understand that the title "Do Not Split" has the meaning that related to this protest for democracy. So can you share with that?
I think the title can be seen at least in two ways. Do Not Split was actually one of the slogans of the protesters, of the pro-democracy protesters. And it plays on their ways of dealing with discussion, because this was not the first democracy protest in Hong Kong. There have been several before. So this was a new wave of democracy protests. The last one you had in 2014, it was called the Umbrella Movement. And the problem at that time was internal discussions among the protesters about which means and tactics to use. And that made them weaker because they had internal conflict. So it was very striking when I arrived in 2019 that the protesters wanted to have a very open approach, and also they wanted to be open about that they were in favor of different tactics, but they wouldn't criticize each other for that. No one was forced to do something that they didn't want to do, but they were all seeing this as a mass movement where people could protest in the way that they felt comfortable with. And that, to make it more concrete, that means that some would protest with a song. You had these flash mobs, office workers, also in the financial district, coming out of their offices during the lunch break just to sing some protest songs and then go back to work. And then you had other protesters at the other end, dressing up fully in black, wearing masks and doing quite radical things. But I think the protesters, they succeeded in the sense that they stood together and they were accepting these different means. Then there's another meaning in the title of Do Not Split, which plays on Beijing, the political leadership in Beijing and their effort to keep and change Hong Kong into a city which is similar to the cities in mainland China. Hong Kong is in a special situation in the sense that it used to be a colony under Britain for a very long time. And then Hong Kong was handed back from Britain to China in 1997. And from that time, Hong Kong was supposed to be ruled under a so-called one country, two systems principles, which meant that Hong Kong was formally a part of China, but would have its autonomy, would have its own legal system, would have its own not only rule of law, but the legislative council. They had much bigger degree of freedom of press, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. So basically the whole system of how Hong Kong was supposed to be governed was very different from what we see in mainland China. And what made these protests so big was that the protesters were afraid that they were losing this special autonomy, that they basic human rights, and that they were becoming another city in China, being ruled under in a way that I won't call democratic, and which definitely the protesters didn't call democratic.
People's mentality has been stronger and stronger, and they become less and less afraid of the police. The violence conducted by the police has also been strengthening over time. So given that we are not giving up, we will just upgrade our our means in response.
They put on the mask so people told that may be tear gas soon.
戴住眼嘅舉手啊！戴住眼舉手！舉手！戴住眼嘅舉手！
I can easily, watching the protest in Hong Kong, that really reminds me of my country, South Korea, in 1970s and 80s, and I could easily relate it to the citizens, and just the promised high level of a democracy and autonomy is just suddenly gone. And I could understand the citizens' fear and anger. But as a documentary filmmaker, you spent almost a year there on the streets of Hong Kong, and it must be really, really challenging. And you are just in the middle of imminent danger for yourself. But at the same time, you successfully captured various aspect of a protest, the human side, and also the big picture as well. So first of all, why do you think it was important for you to be there and make a film about this protest?
I don't think that would have been important for me to be there if I didn't succeed in making a story that could work as a supplement to other stories from Hong Kong. And that was my aim, because there's been so many stories coming out of Hong Kong, and they were all over the news in 2019, at least for periods, often during the most dramatic events. I had the idea that I really wanted to capture intensity of the streets and to go as close as possible to the protesters and then just follow the whole process. Of course, this is a short documentary, so there's a lot that we couldn't take and show in the movie. But I think we managed to show some parts of the protests which you couldn't see in the main news back then, because I was basically following different protesters from the beginning to the end of the day. So I would end up in these situations that I hadn't seen elsewhere. And I wanted to make this very intimate portrait of the protesters, where I could move with the camera as close as possible to the protesters and just follow the very unpredictable developments. And there was a lot of running. The protesters were escaping from the police, and then sometimes they would go home, other times they would reorganize and hit back in other ways. And I wanted to just be following all that with the camera and just float around with the movements. And that, for me, that made sense. That could tell a story that for me is emotional, maybe on another level than other documentaries I worked on before, where I used more traditional interview formats, to put it that way. I wanted this to be in the streets and to just capture this really fascinating way of protesting and fighting for basic human rights.
Well, as a documentary maker, we often became kind of we are confined our own agenda, even though that is for good agenda to support the protest and the fighting for democracy. But I was really impressed at how you keep all the balance covering the various scenes of the protest. Some scenes were visceral and up close, very personal, and even humorous moments. But at the same time, fierce protest and a peaceful time. So was it challenging for you as your journalist instinct and the documentary director's instincts? Did they collide, or did you find a way to combine into a?
No, I felt at ease myself, both physically and intellectually, with the way I was approaching what was going on in Hong Kong. For me, it was very clear that this couldn't be a story that would show everything that happened. I was very clear about that it should be a short documentary, because I have very good experiences with short documentaries being published online, and Field of Vision, which have been collaborating very closely on this project, are specializing in short documentaries. So of course you have to make a lot of tough choices when you're working in a short format. But I think I had the documentary mindset when I went into this, that I wanted to show the different kind of emotions and movements which erupted during this very special time in modern history. To my mind, this is one of the most important events in international politics, the way China is expanding and the way basic human rights are put under great pressure and also disappearing in Hong Kong, and the way the rest of the world is relating to this situation. Beijing is very powerful, so many governments are afraid that if they come out and criticize very clearly what is happening in Hong Kong, they might be sanctioned by Beijing and lose money or lose political power. So it's a very important event and development on many levels, and very serious in this sense that a big group of people are losing basic human rights.
Yes, and in your film, I forgot to mention that you also included, pro-China protesters as well. Was it intentional? You could, easily take it out of your film if you want to make your voice, your perspective stronger.
If anything, I would have liked to have more of the pro-Beijing side to show that not everyone were agreeing with what the pro-democracy protesters were fighting for. And in the beginning, I also had the idea that I wanted to make like a three-part story. I wanted to follow the pro-democracy protesters, the police, and the pro-Beijing groups. That became quite a challenge, because the police were acting quite easily in the way that they were not disturbing too much of my filming when I was around them in the beginning. But that changed. They became much more aggressive towards the reporters, definitely the local reporters, but also the foreign reporters. They were unhappy with, I think, the whole situation, and they definitely were frustrated. But they also became more aggressive in the way they were handling us as reporters. And you know that as a documentary filmmaker, you need access. But when you are pushed and physically abused, and the police are making threats and they are just giving you a hard time, it's really difficult to work with them and to follow them closely. And they didn't want to give any formal interviews. With the pro-Beijing groups, I had even bigger problems, because I really wanted to follow their processes as well, even though that their protests were much smaller and didn't happen as frequently. I wanted to do some of the same stuff that I did with the pro-democracy protesters, but that was actually not possible, because they were not friendly the ones I met were not friendly towards me as a reporter. They accused me and other reporters of making fake news, and they called us corrupted journalists and that sort of thing. So they were not happy, I think, with the general media coverage in general. I think that they thought that many of the news stories were in favor of the pro-democracy protesters, and then they didn't trust me enough to give me the access I would have needed if I was to follow them. But I'm happy that we made the move in the way we did, because I really think it was important to focus on the pro-democracy protesters and the different ways they were organizing and how they were put under really great pressure during this whole period that the story spans over. So, but this is, of course, this you have seen so many different stories coming out of Hong Kong, and I'm happy that you could approach this and just show different angles. But it's impossible to do all that in one short documentary.
Well, especially in this year, they're not just about Hong Kong with what's happening now in the Myanmar, and I think the significance of this film has got the more stronger. It's a real, and also this the ban of broadcasting Oscar ceremony by Chinese government this is something never happened in Hong Kong since 1969 when they firstly broadcasted the Oscar ceremony. And what do you make of that?
So after our documentary, which is about the pro-democracy movement protesting against Beijing, people started to tell me after it was shortlisted for Oscars that Beijing would react. So I think I and everyone else on the team were expecting a reaction from Beijing after the documentary also got nominated for Oscars. And then we saw, without anyone getting in touch with us, we just read media reports a couple of days later that supposedly the government in Beijing has told its local media to downplay Oscars all in all this year, and also to not focus on what they see as sensitive issues, like our movie, which is about protesters protesting against Beijing. But we never received a formal reason for the censorship in mainland China or Hong Kong. None of the government representatives reached out to us, so we can only guess and read what we see in the news and what reporters tell us when we speak with them. But we haven't seen any formal statement being put out by the government. We just see that there will be censorship this year.
Well, I think it's just your film, the Do Not Split, really tells us the importance of documentary, because you capture what's happening in reality, and at the same time something that cannot be, we as an audience, we cannot have an access through the major media. And also you provide the facts behind the facts to let us think again about the relationship with the citizen government, about the value of a democracy. So I think it's this film should be shared with more audience around the globe, and I understand that your film has been open to public at the Field of Vision websites. And is there lastly, is there anything you'd wish that your audience, how do they feel or they think about the film after watch this?
I hope people who watch the movie will care about the situation in Hong Kong, and will perhaps, if they are abroad or in a place watching this far away from Hong Kong, they might seek more information about what's going on. Some of the stuff which is happening in Hong Kong is quite complicated, but to my mind, it's one of the most serious developments in the world today, where we see how democratic rights, which we think everyone should be able to use in their everyday lives, is suddenly put under great pressure in a place that used to be very liberal. And in a very short time, Hong Kong changed a lot. And I think if we, as a world, allows this to happen, it could easily happen many other places. Because if the political development and suppression of human rights is not met with resistance, the people who are the political leadership will try to gain more power by suppressing people.
Well, most importantly, I believe that the biggest value of your film is that you gave us access to the reality we've been missing, or overwhelmed by the news of coronavirus pandemics and different in these rapid news cycles. We just easily forget what's happening, and though something that is important. I think that
Thank you.
is wonderful, and I good luck with the at the Oscar racing, and I also have to thank again to Vidiots Foundation, which has been enormously supportive of documentary filmmakers and has almost 35 years of commitment to showcasing the stories to serve an enlightened audience and to provide access to different reality around the world and about the humanities. And I'm very happy, glad, that honored to have a talk with you that reflects the spirit of documentary and also the Vidiots Foundation as well. And thank you, and really good luck.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you very much for the audience joining our conversation. Thank you.